Good evening to one and all present. I hope all of you are safe and sound. I am Palak Java, Assistant Professor, Birla School of Law, Birla Global University, and I would like to welcome all of you to the webinar on the rise in the cases of domestic violence in lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. We at Birla believe that no matter what the situation is, we should not stop educating ourselves, and hence we took an opportunity to organize this webinar. I would like to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Parumita Chattoraj, Associate Dean, KIIT School of Law. Dr. Chattoraj has completed her PhD in the area of rape laws in 2013. She has been involved as the project coordinator for the International Self-Report Delinquency Study Phase 3 since 2012, which is an international collaborative research with 35 participating countries. She is also the recipient of the ICSSR grant in 2013 and 14 for the data collection in the US for the collaborative research on the topic of sentencing in rape cases. She was also invited to give the keynote at the Journalism Law School Fellowship, Loyola Law School, California in 2016. Ma'am, it is an honor to have you with us today. We also have with us today Professor Dr. Lalit Kumar Dev, Dean, Birla School of Law, Mr. Punishlok Dash, Assistant Professor, Birla School of Law, Ms. Ishani Acharya, Program Manager, Birla School of Law, and Ms. Ashna Siddiqui, Academic Associate, Birla School of Law. I welcome all of you. Domestic violence is one of the most dangerous evils in our society, but people fail to sometimes understand what it actually is. So that is why in some cases what happens is the abusers themselves do not realize that they are actually inflicting domestic violence on the other person, or similarly the victim may fail to realize that the behavior that they are experiencing is actually domestic violence. So it is very important to spread awareness about this particular topic, especially during this pandemic, because while some might be enjoying this quality time that they have got with their families, but there might be some who might be facing troubles related to domestic violence, and they must be praying for their own safety between their own families, amongst their own families. So that is why we chose this topic for today, and I hope this session will be very informative for all of you. So I would like to now hand over to Dr. Chattoraj. And meanwhile, I would also like to inform our participants that they can send in their queries in the question and answer box available on your screens, and we will address all your questions at the towards the end of the session. Thank you so much, and I hope it is a good session for all of you. Ma'am.
Thank you, Palak. Very good afternoon to all of you present here today. First of all, I would like to thank Birla Global Law School for taking this initiative of conducting this particular webinar on a very, very apt topic. And I especially thank the Dean of Law School, Professor Dev. And I'm also very much happy that one of my students, Ms. Palak Java, who used to be an A student, is coordinating this particular webinar. So I hope that through this particular webinar, we touch upon very relevant issues, which is not only current. Please mind that domestic violence is not an issue because of lockdown or because of COVID pandemic, but domestic violence was there and it is going to be there for years to come. So please think of this issue as a perpetual problem, and from that perspective, we should be delving into the depths of the subject. So let me share a presentation with all of you. For your convenience, I have prepared a presentation which would bring more clarity to the talk. So Palak, if you could just let me know that you are able to see the presentation or not.
Yes, ma'am, we are able to see the screen.
So I'll just this chat box is coming. Just a second, I'll just.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So the current topic that we would be today discussing is the rise in the cases of domestic violence in the lockdown scenario due to the COVID pandemic. Now, lockdown, as Palak just now pointed out, it has different meaning to different people. Yes, many of us feel blessed that we got some quality time with our family. We were running aimlessly for the past so many years in the rat race, and nature really forced all of us to be together with family, having very close connect during these last 2.5 months. But there is the grim side to this particular picture, because for many this phase of the life has actually meant a dreadful reality. To just highlight you the global scenario, according to the UN, the cases of according to the UN, the cases have increased by 20% during the lockdown, as many people are trapped at home with their own abusers. Now, the UN has described this worldwide increase in domestic abuse as a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19. So, this is the rise in the domestic violence is another pandemic that has been coined by the UN itself. WHO stated that countries are reporting up to 60% increase in emergency calls by women subjected to violence by their intimate partners in April this year compared to last year. Early data from the WHO shows that helplines in Singapore and Cyprus have registered a more than 30% increase in calls. Likewise, in Australia also there is 40% increase, and in France, domestic violence cases have also increased 30% since lockdown. Similarly, in Argentina, emergency calls for domestic violence have increased by 25%. So this is just to show that this particular rise of domestic violence is not peculiar to India, rather it is a global phenomenon. Coming to India, just laying certain facts before you, between March 25th and May 31st, the National Commission for Women received 1,477 complaints of domestic violence. Nearly 727 of them were received on its WhatsApp helpline. I have intentionally put the WhatsApp helpline number for any of you to note it down. Set up in April to ensure women who could not access emails or send complaints by post. The total complaints during the 68-day period were actually 2.5 times the number of complaints received during the same period last year. Now, another data that was released by the National Legal Services Authority, which is actually the legal aid that we commonly know, the legal aid services, also suggests that the nationwide lockdown has led to a rapid increase in cases of domestic violence. Uttarakhand actually tops the chart. Then the second is Haryana, and our capital Delhi comes at number 3. According to the Director General of Police Punjab, the average number of calls they have received in their helpline number shot up to 133 from the previous 3 months, which is averaging 99.33%. So you can imagine the sudden shoot in the number of cases registered. So this accounted for 34% increase in domestic violent cases between March 20th and April 20th from last year. Now, I will just show you, I was just showing you the Indian figures. Now, the peculiar problem that is posed by this particular scenario of lockdown is that for women, for instance, the lockdown has resulted in increase in what is known as unpaid work at home. The cooking time has increased as all the family members are at home. The women in rural areas have to walk longer distance for collecting fuel and water in states like Jharkhand and Rajasthan. Now, another problem that emerged due to the paroles granted to prisoners and under trials, because due to the overcrowding of the prisons, there could not be any social distancing that was being maintained in the prison. So many of them had to be given parole. So all these perpetrators came back to home, and many of them were actually abusers and they have been convicted because of their because of the offense committed by them. So they are again back to the family, and that is a nightmare for the woman of the family. Then the another peculiarity that is noticed is that some states have reported a decline in complaints, while others have reported a spike in the calls received by the helplines. Now, this indicates that the incidence of domestic violence during the lockdown depends upon the ability of the victims to make complaints. Please mind this, that when a victim is living with the abuser, obviously the chances of her coming out and reporting the abuse gets diminished if she doesn't have access to some means like phones or smartphones through which she can WhatsApp. Otherwise, it becomes difficult. So in rural India, especially in rural areas, the number of cases will drop because of the peculiar problem that these people are not getting any access to give the complaints. Now, women in the lockdown situation, they cannot travel to police stations, and the social workers cannot reach them and arrange for their travel. Also, the police are overburdened with COVID-19 duties, and visiting homes to investigate these crimes have become a less priority for them. Also, as domestic violence cases are filed in lower courts, being a civil dispute, the courts were only open for emergency hearing of like bail and all. So the hearing of domestic violence cases also diminished because of the lockdown situation. Then there is also a problem where women were rendered helpless because there was no shelter homes, and there was no access to sexual and reproductive health services, as medical staff are diverted to COVID-19 duties. So to sum up, activists, Urvashi Gandhi, who works for Breakthrough, which is a women's rights organization, summed up that with lockdown in place, no one to turn to, and the usual services not reaching them, women living in abusive relationships and their children are forced into or exposed to an uncomfortable and dangerous circumstance. So this was a health situation for these kind of victims of domestic violence. Now I will just take you through the basic concept of domestic violence and the legal response mechanism that has been evolved and developed in our country. And basically, if you see, the general characteristics of domestic violence is that it is pervasive and it is inside us. So it is present everywhere, in every type of society, in every type of culture, and it happens gradually. It doesn't take place just suddenly. Domestic violence is perpetrated gradually. Second is that it is carried out in the private domain of home, and it is inflicted by an intimate partner or a family member. And it continues over a period of time, so it becomes chronic. And also, it definitely limits avenues of escape for the victim. That avenues of escape, that is, all these obstacles that are created for the victim not to be able to escape, is not always physical, but many a times the barriers are mental and emotional. So impact of domestic violence on the victim. So if you see, in addition to violation of human rights, victims of domestic violence can face several physical and mental health problems. Primarily, there is risk of chronic disease due to continuous stress. These women stay in these kind of abusive relationship for years together, and they are very, very panicky. They suffer from anxiety disorders, and they are extremely stressed. And that leads to a very chronic mental disease, which is depression. There are also problems in the form of sexual disorders, because there is a natural apathy towards sexual relationship or a healthy sexual relationship, because these women most of the time feel forced. Then there is also a symptomatic psychological disorder in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder, and sometimes it also leads to substance abuse. And disconnection from social support system is one of the reasons for an increased risk of domestic violence. Now, domestic violence under the Indian legal framework, how that is manifested in the Indian laws. Primarily, the law that we used to have for the longest time is cruelty by husband and relatives of husband under section 498A of the Indian Penal Code, which takes into account both physical as well as mental cruelty. Then demand of dowry has been identified as a form of mental cruelty. Then dowry death, which is an extreme form of domestic violence where a woman is killed due to the demand of dowry, in connection with the demand of dowry under section 304B of the Indian Penal Code. Now, the 2005 Prevention of Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, which is the primary law to deal with domestic violence, that has identified certain specific forms of abuses in the form of physical abuse, verbal or emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and economic abuse. I will just take you through the different types of domestic violence. So if you see, sorry. Yes. So if you see, the meaning of domestic violence under the law is that it is any act, omission, or commission or conduct by the respondent, and it constitutes domestic violence in the form where it harms or injures or endangers the health, safety, and life, limb, or well-being, whether mental or physical, of the aggrieved person, or tends to do so, and includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and as well as economic abuse. It also manifests in the form of harassment, where the abuser harasses, harms, injures, or endangers the aggrieved person with a view to coerce her or any other person related to her to meet any unlawful demand for any dowry or other property or valuable security. Thirdly, it manifests in the form where it has the effect of threatening the aggrieved person or any person related to her by any conduct, or otherwise injures or causes harm, whether physical or mental, to the aggrieved person. Now, as I just mentioned, the types of abuses, physical abuse, all of you can understand very well, conceive what it means. For the first time, sexual abuse has been identified as a kind of deviance or violation under the law. All of you know that under the Indian legal regime, marital rape is not criminalized unless it is committed on a minor wife. Minor wife, I say, because after Independent Thought versus Union of India decision, any minor, whether she has been violated, her sexual autonomy has been violated by the husband or not, if she is a minor, it would be constituted as a rape. Now, apart from that, no form of marital rape is criminalized under the Indian law. However, sexual abuse has been recognized as a form of domestic violence. And if you see, it means it includes any conduct of a sexual nature that abuses. And if I may just take a break here, due to this particular box that is appearing here, I'm not able to see my slides properly. How can I remove this box? Palak? Hello?
Ma'am, you can minimize it. There is a provision to minimize that box.
I'm trying to do that, but I can't see that. And okay. Now it is fine. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll continue now. Yes. So sexual abuse includes any conduct of a sexual nature that abuses, humiliates, degrades, or otherwise violates the dignity of a woman. Please mind it that this sexual abuse does not entitle a woman to get her husband criminally punished for this. This particular law nowhere calls for punishing the husband. This law is protective in nature, and the punishment, whatever, or penalty, whatever has been proclaimed under the law, that is only for non-compliance of the orders given under the law, not for perpetrating the violence. So sexual abuse can be identified as a form of abuse in order for getting the relief under this act, but not to punish the perpetrator. I hope that you understand the fine distinction between sexual abuse and marital rape in this context. The third type of abuse is verbal and emotional abuse. And if you see the act just it makes it a couple, that is verbal or emotional abuse has been used interchangeably under this particular law, although emotional abuse in itself is a very wide term, and in fact in all forms of other abuses emotional abuse may be coupled, but this act uses emotional abuse only in connection with verbal abuse, and it includes insults, ridicule, humiliation, name calling, and insults or ridicule, especially with regard to not having a child or a male child, which is very much peculiar to the Indian culture in many of the states, and repeated threats to cause physical pain to any person in whom the aggrieved person is interested. Lastly, economic abuse has been identified as a form of abuse, and it means any deprivation of financial resources to which the aggrieved person is entitled, or disposal of household effects or alienation of assets that may be in the form of shares, securities, valuables, etc., or prohibitions or restrictions to continued access to resources to which the aggrieved person is entitled by virtue of being in relationship with the man. So now I come to you. I have been just taking this term aggrieved person, that who's the aggrieved person. Actually the aggrieved person is the victim, and under the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, every woman can be designated as an aggrieved person who suffers domestic violence by having a domestic relationship with the perpetrator, and the perpetrator under this particular act has been designated as the respondent. So the abuser under this particular act, the abuser or the perpetrator of domestic violence is known as the respondent. And who is he? He is an adult male person per se. He is an adult male person and in a domestic relationship with the aggrieved person, that is the victim, and an aggrieved person or female living in a relationship in the nature of marriage, and may also file a complaint against the relative of the husband or the male partner. So here, please identify this particular peculiarity here, that generally an abuser would be a male person. However, if the relationship is in the nature of marriage, that is, it is either a marriage relationship, a proper legal wedlock, or even a live-in relationship. In such cases, any relative of that husband or any relative of that male person can be an abuser. That means that even female relatives can be an abuser. And this was held in two of these cases, Hiralal P. Harsora and Kusum Nartam Das Harsora, and Sandhya Wankade's case. So these were the two judgments which clarified that an aggrieved person is always a woman under the law. However, an abuser or the respondent can be a male as well as a female person. But the only exception here is, in order for a female to be an abuser, the relationship with which the aggrieved person is bound with the respondent must be a relationship of marriage or in the nature of marriage. So from here also we understand one aspect, that I'll take you to the aspect of victim, that is aggrieved person, that an aggrieved person can be every woman. So this is actually distinct from the concept of domestic violence in the global scenario, because in the global scenario, domestic violence as a crime is gender neutral, where both male and female can be victims as well as perpetrators. However, in the Indian scenario, only women can be, or women have been regarded as victims. and perpetrators can be male generally. But if the relationship is in the nature of marriage, then along with the husband, if the mother-in-law or the sister-in-law is perpetrating abuses, then those women or those female members can also be tagged as a respondent. So domestic relationship, what exactly is domestic relationship? The law explains that a relationship between two persons who live or have lived at any point of time in a shared household when they are related by consanguinity, marriage, or a relationship in the nature of marriage or adoption, or are family members living together as a joint family. So please understand here that it is not that only a wife can be a victim, but a daughter can be a victim of domestic violence, a sister can be a victim of domestic violence. Likewise, a mother can also be a victim of domestic violence, because the aggrieved person can be a woman, and that woman, if she has a domestic relationship by any of these means, then she can or she qualifies to be a aggrieved person. Now, the concept of shared household is a unique concept under the law, under this particular act. And by shared household, it means that where the person aggrieved lives or at any stage has lived in a domestic relationship, either singly or along with the respondent. And it includes such a household, whether owned or tenanted, either jointly by either of them, in respect of which either of them or both jointly or singly have any right, title, interest, or equity. And it includes such a household which may belong to the joint family of which the respondent is a member, irrespective of whether he or the aggrieved person has any right, title, or interest in the shared household. Now, I will just give you two examples here. Suppose a man and his wife lived in a tenanted house, rented house for a little while. Then the husband switched jobs and leaving his wife behind in that particular rented house, he moved to another city. And in that situation, the husband gets into some other relationship, or maybe he is not bothered about the wife anymore, so he stops taking care of the wife. In such a situation, just imagine the plight of the woman and try to identify whether any kind of abuse has been perpetrated on that woman or on that particular woman or not. Can you identify a particular, you just make a mental note of this instance, because this man is no more there living with his wife in that particular house, but he had lived. So the law, according to this particular meaning of shared household, that household is a shared household, and because they are legally wedded or they are man and wife, so that relationship is a domestic relationship. Now, in such a situation, if the man moves out and stops taking care of the wife, does not maintain her, or abuses her over phone, in such a scenario, do you think the woman has any remedy? So this is something to ponder upon. Now, taking you to the different stakeholders that have been identified under this particular act. If you can see, the aggrieved person can actually reach to number of people under this act. First and foremost, there are two different stakeholders that have been identified under this particular law, which were previously not heard of under any law, except for Juvenile Justice Act, where service provider, the concept of service provider is there. So under this particular law, a victim or an aggrieved person can reach to a protection officer who is actually a public servant, and under the act, a protection officer can be appointed for every district. Then second is a service provider. Third is the police station. Fourth is directly to a magistrate. And obviously, if a woman has gone for a medical checkup or has gone to a hospital facility where the hospital people witness that or understand that she is a victim of abuse, then in such a case, the particular lady can, the particular in charge of the medical facility can report such abuse to any of these people that are mentioned here. Now, I'll just brief you a little bit about whether how the particular situation is tackled under the Act. I'll just put on my microphone. So, within 3 days of receipt of the application by the court, first date of hearing is fixed. Notice of the date of hearing shall be served to the respondent within 2 days of its receipt from the magistrate by the protection officer. If required, ex parte or interim orders are passed. The magistrate shall endeavour to dispose of every application within 60 days of from the date of the first hearing. And in case of appeal, the appeal lies to the Court of Sessions, which shall be filed 30 days of the service of the order. Now, where exactly the case can be filed? Under the jurisdiction clause of the Act, it is very clearly laid out that if you want to file a case in the Court of Judicial Magistrate of first class or the Metropolitan Magistrate within the local limits of the area, then it has to be in a place where you permanently or temporarily reside or carry on your business or you are employed, or where the perpetrator permanently resides or temporarily resides or carry on his business or employment, or where the cause of action had taken place. So if you are, suppose you have been taken to another new city and you were living there, and the perpetration of domestic violence happened in that new city, in that rented house where you are sharing that house with your husband, you need not come back to your permanent residence, but you can file the cause of action then and there. That explains the proximity of the cause of action with the local jurisdiction. Now, let us just ponder upon the salient features of the Domestic Violence Act. I would just point out that the concept of protection officer and service providers, these are two pillars who afford the initial support mechanism for a victim of domestic violence. A protection officer is appointed under the law, whereas service providers are the NGOs who can be registered under the particular state government and they can be recognized as service providers. So the protection officers and the service providers, they have very significant roles under this particular law. The protection officer, prima facie, he is responsible of preparing a domestic incidents report. Now, there is a pro forma for a domestic incidents report, and according to that pro forma, the protection officer will present that domestic incidents report. It is nothing but the type of abuse, the timing of the abuse, manner and mode of the abuse, all that is systematically noted by the protection officer, which he has to submit before the magistrate. Then the role of the service provider is like putting or giving additional support to the victim in the form where the victim needs immediate psychological counseling because she may be in extremely vulnerable situation. The service provider can actually get her in touch with different counselors, and the protection officer can also aid in this. Apart from that, both the service providers and protection officer together, they can discuss the different remedies that the victim can get under the law, and they can take her to different other avenues where maybe if she wants to go for a case, then she needs a lawyer, then they would introduce her to a lawyer, and if she's not able to pay for the lawyer, she is introduced to lawyer out of the state legal services authorities, impaneled lawyers. So these are very key factors which ensure that the victim gets immediate attention, and she can come out of that abusive relationship and be protected. The third salient feature I would like to introduce is the concept or provision of safe shelter home. And this is important because many a times the victims are apprehensive of reporting domestic violence, because they know that if they report domestic violence, the abuse will be intensified. So for beginners, they have to just escape from the abusive environment, so they need an alternative shelter. So this provision of safe shelter home is provided prima facie by the protection officer in collaboration with service providers. And if she is in a very vulnerable situation, she can be placed in this safe shelter home. As I just pointed out about counseling, counseling can be arranged by the protection officers and service providers, but the law also mandates a magistrate who is hearing the matter of domestic violence to see that if there is opportunity for the couple or the family members to get counseling and resolve their problems amongst themselves, then they may not pursue or press the different compliance procedure under the law. In fact, the magistrate would suggest in the presence of a family welfare expert for the parties to sit for a counseling, and if a counseling is successful, then that ends the matter there. But if it is not successful, there are different remedies that are available under the law. The next unique feature of this act is the right to reside in a shared household. Now, many a times it happens so that the woman is financially dependent on the respondent, the victim is financially dependent on the respondent, and she has no place to go. So the first thought of making a complaint against the respondent or against the domestic violence for her is that she would be kicked out of her house. She would be kicked out of her home. But that is barred under this particular act, because the shared household which she was sharing with the respondent, being in a domestic relationship, she has a right to remain in that house. If she is scared, if she doesn't want to stay there, she needs immediate alternative shelter home that can be arranged. But if she wants to stay there, then the law provides her some kind of an immunity in the form of the provision whereby she has a right to reside in the shared household, and the respondent is not allowed to kick her out of her home. Lastly, the unique feature of this particular act is that the penalty for the abuser here is only for non-compliance, as I just mentioned before, and not for, it is not meant to punish for the violence. Now you have to understand from where this particular concept comes. In an Indian society, a woman who is very much domesticated, and for her, her house, her home, her husband, her family is sanctified. There, she would never want, and it would be a last resort for her to see that her family disintegrates because her husband goes to jail for committing violence on her. So this particular law makes it kind of indirect to compel the husband or the respondent to comply with the different orders of the under the law, which will immediately stop the violence from being perpetrated. But it is not punishing or maligning or labeling the respondent, who is a family member of the aggrieved person, as a criminal. So this has a psychological benefit and a psychological edge for the victim, who thinks that even though I complain, my husband or say my brother would not be a criminal, and he would not be declared or proclaimed as a criminal. And what is demanded of him is only certain compliances, so that the victim is spared from the perpetration of domestic violence. Now, the specific reliefs or the remedies under this Domestic Violence Act are in the nature of protection order, residence order, monetary order, custody order, compensation, and interim and ex parte orders. I will just briefly take you all through these. So, protection order is an order to cease the domestic violence immediately. So it is given whereby the person is stopped from committing any further act of domestic violence. So the respondent is prohibited from committing any act of domestic violence, aiding or abetting in the commission of domestic violence, entering the place of employment if the victim is employed, attempting to communicate in whatever form to through the victim, either orally or written or electronic or telephonic contact. So then the respondent is prevented from alienating any assets, any bank or lockers or any common jointly or singly operated by the aggrieved person. And he cannot deprive the aggrieved person from any of her earlier rights, economic rights, what she was enjoying.
Ma'am, I think
And
there is a problem with the audio.
Okay.
We are unable to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Ma'am, you're not
Palak,
audible.
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
It's audible.
It's audible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Just a second. Yes. So I will continue, okay? So the next order is protection order. After protection order, the next very vital order is in the form of residence order. And the innovative nature of this order is that it restrains the respondent from disposing or disturbing the possession of the victim from the shared household, whether or not the respondent has any legal or equitable interest in the shared household. On the other hand, it can direct the respondent to remove himself from the shared household. So the perpetrator, maybe he's the owner of the house, but he may be asked to go out of the house because he was perpetrating the domestic violence. But the victim can never be asked by the respondent to go out of the house. Then thirdly, restraining the respondent or any of his relatives from entering any part of the shared household where the aggrieved person was staying, restraining the respondent from alienating or disposing of the rights of the shared household, restraining the respondent from renouncing his rights in the shared household except with the leave of the magistrate, and directing the respondent to secure same level of alternative accommodation for the aggrieved person as enjoyed by her in her shared household, or to pay the rent for the same. Now, this is one point that I would like to highlight, that though there is a right of shared household, but many of the victims would not want to remain in that house because of the presence of the abuser. There, if she wishes so, the respondent has to make arrangement for her alternative accommodation, but that cannot be in a hut. It has to be in a standard where she is used to living. So this is a very important liability for the respondent. Next, the two other types of reliefs that can be ordered here in the form of monetary relief and compensation. And if you see under monetary relief, it is given for loss of earnings, the medical expenses, the loss caused due to destruction, damage, or removal of any property from the control of the aggrieved person, and the maintenance for the aggrieved person as well as her children, if any, including an order under or in addition to the 125 order, section 125 order under the criminal procedure, that is the maintenance order. The monetary relief shall be adequate, fair, and reasonable, and consistent with the standard of living to which the aggrieved person is accustomed. And it can be lump sum as well as monthly payment as the court pleases or the court satisfied. Now, compensation, in the other hand, is in addition to any of the reliefs given under the law. And the compensation is actually ordered as a means of paying damages for injuries, and those injuries can be mental as well as emotional injuries. So the compensation is always an addendum, but a monetary relief is a must. In case of domestic violence, monetary relief for maintaining the woman as well as the child is a mandatory relief if domestic violence is proved. Custody order, this is another very significant order, because many of the abusive relationship, the respondent tries to take the alibi of the child in order to continue the perpetration of violence, and the woman puts up with such abuse because she doesn't want to be severed from her child. So the custody order takes care of this, and under this, the magistrate at any stage of the hearing of the application for protection order or for any other relief may grant temporary custody of any child to the aggrieved person if necessary, with the arrangement for visit of such child by the respondent. However, if the magistrate is of opinion that any visit of the respondent may be harmful to the interest of the child or children, the magistrate shall refuse to allow such visits. So this is the custody order. And now I'll just point out just a few important judgments which will clarify number of confusions that may crop up in the interpretation of the different provisions. Primarily, this particular case in 2010, that is Veluswamy versus Pachiammal case. In this case, the Supreme Court verdict, the court enumerated 5 ingredients of a live-in relationship, because this is a law where live-in relationship was considered as a kind of it has given a legal color, you can say, and there even the live-in partner is entitled to get the relief under this act, provided certain conditions are satisfied. Those conditions were laid out in this particular case. So here the conditions are that both the parties must behave as husband and wife and are recognized as such in front of the society. They must be of a valid legal age for marriage. They should qualify to enter into marriage. Example, none of the partners should have a spouse living at the time of entering into a relationship. So if a man or a woman is already having a spouse living, and it is kind of in the nature of bigamous marriage, then that relationship would not be considered under this particular act. Only relationship in the nature of marriage which is monogamous marriage, not bigamous marriage. Then the next condition is that they must have voluntarily cohabited for a significant period of time, and they must have lived together in a shared household. The Supreme Court also observed that not all live-in relationships will amount to a relationship in the nature of marriage to get the benefit of the Domestic Violence Act. So this is a very poignant judgment, because many of the times there are unscrupulous parties who initiate malicious process on proceedings against male members, and for whatever motives, and they just because they were in a relationship, they claim that they are entitled to the remedies under the law. But no, these conditions have to be satisfied in order to enumerate, or in order to identify a relationship as a relationship in the nature of marriage. The next judgment was given in 2009, which is Suresh versus Jaibir, where the magistrate is not only empowered to grant monetary relief while finally disposing of an application under subsection 1 of section 12 of the Act, but empowered to grant maintenance to the aggrieved person as an interim arrangement during the pendency of the application by way of passing an interim order. So the interim order, there is specific provision that this is also relating to that particular issue only, but this is a more recent judgment. So same point has been raised in this law also, this judgment also, that interim or ex parte order may be passed in relation to any of the reliefs that have been granted, provided the magistrate is satisfied of a prima facie act of domestic violence. And in that case, even if the other party does not appear, the magistrate can pass an ex parte order and an interim order whereby the immediate support is created for the victim. Now, let us come back to the lockdown situation. So the court's response to the rise in domestic violence during the lockdown situation has been that many of the courts have taken cognizance of this issue of increased domestic violence incidents during lockdown. And on April 18, 2020, Jammu and Kashmir High Court passed an order taking suo motu cognizance of domestic violence cases during lockdown and offered a slew of directions, including creating a special fund and designating informal safe places for women like grocery stores and pharmacies where they could report domestic violence or abuse without alerting the perpetrators. The Karnataka High Court too asked the state government about the helplines and the action taken on domestic violence complaints. The state responded stating that helplines, counselors, shelter homes and protection officers were working round the clock to help victims of violence. Also, the Delhi High Court recently directed the state and center to take measures for protection of women from domestic violence following a petition filed by an NGO. And the center, Delhi government and the National and State Commission of Women submitted status reports on the action taken by them on number of aspects like awareness of helplines, shelters or one-stop homes, as well as appointment of protection officers. So during lockdown also, these services were there, provided one knows where to look. Now, what was the state's response? I have just taken 3 states who have been proactive. Now, the Delhi government told the Supreme Court on April 12 that it put in place a protocol to tackle the increased number of domestic violence cases during lockdown. So they have actually formulated a SOP. The SOP says that once a survivor reaches out to the helpline, that is 181 in Delhi, the telecaller will take down her complaint and then forward her case to a counselor who is required to establish a phone communication with her on account of the lockdown. The counselor is empowered to conduct sessions, that is counseling sessions with the woman and her spouse or family if required. In case the woman is a victim of sexual or physical assault, the telecaller is required to inform the police about the case and assist in filing the FIR. Lastly, the counselor is further required to inform the protection officer to allow them to file the domestic incidents report. Okay, so you can see that there is a standard protocol has been laid out, and only awareness can help these women to reach and take the benefit of these particular actions. Similarly, in Andhra Pradesh, a help desk was set up by the Mahila Commission and a WhatsApp number was circulated to report violence against them during the lockdown. As domestic violence cases reported in the state were related to financial problems during lockdown period, the government offered 1,000 rupees financial assistance aid to rural women and free ration supply in 4 phases. In Odisha, the police has come up with an initiative through which policemen contracted women who had earlier reported domestic violence to inquire about their condition over phone during the ongoing lockdown. The special drive Phone Up program had been launched across the state to deal with the problems of domestic violence in the crisis period. So according to the Odisha police, they did not wait for the report or the complaints to come through. Rather, they reached out to the victims who had earlier reported any domestic violence to check on them to see if they are doing okay. Now, the support services during lockdown, globally, I'll just take you, for instance, some support services like in Ukraine, Tetian Frankchuk, a psychologist with a UNFPA-supported mobile psychological team, has been providing counseling services via Skype, Viber, Zoom, and phone since the quarantine started. Similarly, in France, Germany, Italy, Norway, and Spain, pharmacies and supermarkets have become safe go-to spaces where the utterance of a code word, that is mask 19, signals an urgent request for protection from domestic abusers. These locations are often the only retailers open, and shopping for essential groceries is the only accepted reason for people to leave their homes during lockdown. So this is the situation in the global scenario, and similar provision has been directed by our courts also, that if the women are suffering acute violence in the hands of their abusers, they should use code words to signal to grocery shop owners or retail shop owners, retail shop people which are open in the with the excuse of going for shopping, and they should alert the fact that they are undergoing this kind of violence. Now, the support services in India, due to the rise in the domestic violence incidents, is that one-stop centers, a scheme was launched by the Ministry of Women and Child Development in April 1st, 2015. These are general. So I will just, because there is paucity of time, I would like some of you to get some time for question and answer. So you can see there have been medical examination, women help desk, and there are certain other facilities that has been provided as means of support services in India also for domestic violence victims. Now, how should victims respond? What victims of domestic violence must remember is not to blame themselves for what is happening to them. Domestic violence is unacceptable and the perpetrators is 100% responsible. Victims, therefore, must not make excuses for the actions of the perpetrators, as there are none. Acceptance of such actions may lead to a vicious cycle of abuse. The option of reporting domestic abuse to the police is always available. However, if the victim does not intend on the course of action, they can create a safety plan for themselves with a safe word, like a code word, to alert people they live with when faced with threatening situation. It is advisable to keep a friend, family, neighbor, or someone in proximity informed in case of escalating risk. It is also helpful to discuss this with trusted family members or friends and build perpetrator accountability. There are also a number of helplines for domestic violence which you can just Google and see. And therefore, the bottom line is there is no excuse to continue to put up or withstand with abusive relationship or domestic violence. You must say no to abuses. You must say no to violence. Otherwise, you will continue as a contributor in this cycle of violence. This is a list of NGOs who are working against domestic violence. If you want, I can just forward this list to the organizers. They can forward it to your email. For any of you, either you are in the legal field or not, but you can make use of these NGOs who are helping victims and people, women, to get support system during their crisis. And you can also, as a responsible citizen, reach out to these victims and lend them support in their crisis. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation, ma'am. It was very, very insightful, and I am very sure that the audience must have they must have received a lot from this presentation. So I have a few questions here with me. So there were a lot of questions revolving around the work of National Commission for Women in this for this particular crime during the for this particular domestic violence during the lockdown services. So during the lockdown. So the question, I will merge 2-3 questions together. So the question that has come up is, what do you think that the role of NCW has been to curb the rise of domestic violence, and do you think that their jurisdiction is very narrow with respect to this particular issue?
See, the role of the National Commission for Women is the role of an initiator as well as a facilitator. Now, the main mechanisms to facilitate reporting by the victims, they have been devised by the National Commission for Women during this lockdown and before that also. So in that way, if they can employ technical experts and enable these kind of facilities and make the victims aware through their numerous programs, and this also, the National Commission for Women, they also do the work of gelling when it comes to liaising with the police. So they can also get the victims aligned with the police persons in order to expedite their proceedings. So in that way, if the National Commissioner for Women is proactive, it can really bring fruitful results. And I think during the lockdown, most of the states' National Commission for Women, they have been proactively engaged in providing a support mechanism by recording the reports, by disseminating that information to the requisite stakeholders, be it the police, be it the service providers, so that the domestic violence can be stopped. So National Commission for Women, I think their role can be very, very significant if they take that initiative to become an important stakeholder in the scheme of things.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, another question that we received a lot was related to that in India, why do we consider that there are only male perpetrators when it comes to domestic violence and there are only female victims when it comes to domestic violence? Why can't it be generalized to everybody, whether it be male or female or third gender in that case?
So whoever has asked this question, I cannot agree more with them. And if you take my personal view, I think that this should be gender neutral, but always understand that laws like this, which are primarily enacted for affording better protection to women, because still women in India are vulnerable. And when I say this, I'm not taking into consideration women like myself or you. I'm thinking about a woman back in the village without any education, completely dependent on her husband or her matrimonial home for her survival. There, if we make the males also instead of perpetrator, if we make them victims, then there can be numerous instances where these many hapless or helpless women can be used as pawns in getting or you can say in subserving the purpose of these males who maybe just want to get an easy way out of that relationship, because they would just complain that there has been an abuse by my wife, so please take action, so kick her out of the house, she is abusing me continuously. So when you think about these laws, do not think about an urban educated woman. Definitely, she is also equally a victim. But the sad part of the law is that the law is being used or utilized only by these so-called educated victims. The real victims who are not only victims of domestic violence, but also victims because of their destiny, because of the poverty, they are not being able to utilize this particular law. So that is why I don't think the time is ripe enough to make these kind of laws gender neutral, because otherwise there will be extreme exploitation of the law and there will be more victimization of women.
That's very true, ma'am. Thank you so much. Ma'am, there were a lot of questions regarding live-in relationships, but you have already covered that with the case. So I think the question has been answered for the audience. One more question that has been coming up is, now that same-sex relationship has been decriminalized in our country, so what if domestic violence happens in such households where there are same-sex relationships?
See, this is again something which their first maybe the court can tomorrow take these and provide guidelines, or the legislature has to take upon itself. see, it's not just about domestic violence. Now that some same-sex relationships have been legalized, even sexual violence. What about sexual violence perpetrated amongst people of same sex? There is
That's
nothing to address that under the law. So now that this cultural dynamics is changed due to the change in the law, there has to be a lot of overhauling that should be done. And obviously, we should have more debates on these lines, and the legislature should take into account the social reality and have a relook on the different laws. So definitely, domestic violence is not just perpetrated in domestic relationship only involving man and woman, but in obviously same-sex relations also. Wherever the relationship becomes sour, there is a propensity of violence. So definitely, there has to be avenues in the law for providing remedies to such victims also. But as of now, we do not have such mechanisms. But there has to be some initiative in the legislative level to bring in a difference in the lives of these new social dynamics relationships.
So I think this will give our audience a new topic to maybe research upon, to think upon, to deliberate upon, and to reach out to the government to take some measures regarding this particular problem. So, ma'am, these were the questions, the repetitive questions that have been asked. So I tried to merge all of the questions together, and I hope all the questions have been answered. And it was a very interactive and very informative session, and I hope our audience enjoyed being a part of the session. I would like to invite Dr. Deb to please say a few words.
Um,
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Palak. It was a wonderful session wherein the audience and all those who were present, they learnt a lot about domestic violence, the reality, the law, and what are the measures that can be taken to protect it. And Madam has highlighted regarding this COVID pandemic, where all the members of the family live together. So at that time, there's an increase in the domestic violence. Now, Madam has also said that there are many causes for domestic violence. Domestic violence, cruelty, all these, each case is very peculiar in itself. You cannot find similarities between any of them. And another aspect you come across some time back, one team from USA had come to study how a huge family, about 102 members, were living together near Khurda. They wanted to study the joint family system and how it impacts upon the relationship in the particular family. That is one aspect you find, that the joint family, it acts as a shock absorber. Many times that is, it helps in bringing about, that is solutions to many problems. So that is one aspect which can be looked into, the joint family system and how it can have an impact upon the family relations. And many peculiar cases come up. 2 years back, the Supreme Court, under the directions of the Supreme Court, every district court had a committee for this cruelty against women. And I was a member of one of the committees in Berhampur. So one peculiar case came up there, that is, the wife left the husband, but husband said, if the wife cannot be mine, I will see that she doesn't belong to anyone else. And she was still a student, and this husband, she took acid and threw it at her. So peculiar cases come up. Each case, that is has its own peculiarities. Many causes are there, and because these happen inside the closed doors, evidence is not coming up. Many times the statements have to be relied upon. So we have, Madam has discussed many of the cases that have been discussed, the parameters that have been laid down, the guidelines that are there, and it was a very interactive and wonderful session. I thank Madam Paramita Chotraj, Associate Professor in KIT Law School, for giving us wonderful insights into the problems of this domestic violence, especially this during this COVID pandemic. I think once the pandemic is over, then many of the problems will be sorted out. I also thank Professor Palak Java for moderating and raising different issues, organizing this webinar, and wonderfully that is conducting it.
Thank you, sir.
I thank my colleagues, Professor Punyashlok, Professor Asna, Professor Ishna, and our Jagmohan, who is the assistant program manager here. And also we must thank Mr. Pandeyji for his technical support during this webinar and all the webinars and what we are organizing, the university authorities who have been supportive in organizing, in helping us in organizing these webinars. So that is, it was indeed a wonderful session. And again, we will hear from Madam some other time regarding new developments on this domestic violence, and also that is to meet our students sometime and discuss with them. Thank you, Madam, for your wonderful talk on this important topic, domestic violence, because this is an age-old problem. Age-old problem. Even though law is there, many solutions are there. Solutions have been put forward, but each case is peculiar in itself. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I really want to thank ma'am for joining us today, and thank you everyone for making this a successful webinar. I hope we'll meet soon with another topic, and take care and stay healthy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to all. Thank you.